Let's actually go a bit macro,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, for the rest of this conversation. Joe, can you pull up the
Huh?
the doomsday clock?
There it is.
Speaking of warfare, there's been a few bombs dropped. Looks like around the world.
Yeah, it's a
How does
pretty,
your work um, inform your knowledge of the coronavirus and the treatment of it, the spread of it, all that?
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert
Yeah.
on epidemics or widespread pathology like this, but it's I guess some of it I take into consideration like actual effects, and so these numbers you see on the screen can be kind of scary. The over 100,000 cases worldwide, and over 500 or 600 in the U.S.
Couple now in Minnesota.
Yeah, and the numbers are not that scary by themselves, because if you compare it to things like influenza, which has caused a lot more damage, especially in the U.S. this year, even just this year compared to the coronavirus. The most dangerous or potentially scary part of this graphic is the little chart down in the lower right, and looking at those curves. And because if you understand exponential growth, when if I take one bacteria cell and put it in a test tube, it will double every 30 minutes. And if you get that constant exponential growth, by the next morning you have billions of cells. Or
People underestimate it's like compound interest. But
yeah, it's the same, that exponential growth.
Yeah, it's easy to underestimate
So the shape of that
speed.
curve is what can be really scary. And it's nice to see at least the big one, the mainland China, looks like it's pretty much flattened off, and the number of recovered has gone way up. That yellow one is still a little bit scary though, because it looks like it's still about exponential. So if that's the worrisome
That's
one.
the other locations.
Yeah.
Perhaps it would be if it's leveled off in China, why wouldn't it level off in other countries too then?
I think it probably will. There's a chance that
Unless the Chinese are so much better at
well
reacting to it.
they have been pretty effective, because they've instituted this lockdown, which is horrible for civil liberties, but I think it's been pretty effective at actually stopping the spread. It's kind of scary, but I don't know what to think about it really.
Yeah, well, when they want something done, they do it.
Yeah.
And they can,
And
so the U.S. and other countries might not be able to mimic the flatlining or the containing it the way the Chinese
I had
have.
some concern that maybe the numbers coming out of China weren't very accurate, that the cases were a lot higher, because they might be underreporting. But now I think the U.S. has been much worse at underreporting, because we haven't had testing until recently. I think that
It would be easy to go undetected because most people get over it like a normal flu. Yes.
So South Korea has actually been really good at testing it. So if you look at like the fatality rate, if you look in the U.S., the fatality rate is really high. If you kind of divide the number of deaths versus the number of cases, you can look at the percentage there. So,
but that's not because that's just because
we're missing most of the cases here because we're not testing it.
They're not testing it until it's super severe.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
So,
oh my gosh, you're really, really sick. What do you have? Oh.
The CDC really botched this one up, I think. So the World Health Organization developed a very simple and straightforward test that's very easy to implement to use. It's a PCR-based test, polymerase chain reaction, but it's a very standard lab equipment. Most hospitals have a PCR machine. They can implement it very quickly and easily. Using primers, you can buy the components. In my lab sites that I've been ordering pieces of DNA from, they're advertising these primers that you can just get and have shipped to you the next day, and I could be doing the tests. Instead of using this test that the WHO came up with, the CDC decided to develop a much more complicated test that would not only test for this current strain of coronavirus, but also would be able to detect SARS and MERS, these other related viruses that they basically died out years ago and they're no longer around, they could come back, but they developed this much more complicated test, and it ran into problems because they're trying to test for everything. And so nobody could test until less than a week ago. The only lab that was authorized to test was in Georgia and Atlanta. And the number of cases they tested was very few because they had a small capacity and nobody else could mimic these tests. And so people would come into the clinic. I read stories in Washington where people would come into the clinic with symptoms, but if you were not admitted as a patient, they could not test you. So they were not looking at these people. And yeah, it's kind of another thing, a lot of times the clinic or labs at hospitals can develop their own in-house tests.
Yeah,
These are, there's an acronym, I think, lab-specific tests.
Or like
something.
a state department, like Minnesota Department of Health. I mean, can they not? Do they not do that? Do they not?
Normally they can. These labs in the states can develop their own, but the federal government declared a medical emergency. But they declared some state of emergency.
Okay.
And said nobody can do that, which is the exact opposite thing that you'd expect.
Yeah, right.
Or you'd want in this.
We're not China.
No, so it's really botched, and a lot of people went undetected. And
yeah, that's kind of my outlook of the U.S. in general. The U.S. doesn't do government well. Like every national program seems to be poorly run. You know, like whether it's education or healthcare or retirement, like these things just at a national level have never done well. Like when I've traveled to Cuba and I've traveled elsewhere and I meet other people from other countries, obviously, and other travelers too, and we talk about America and they're often rolling their eyes about it, and I'm just like, you got to understand, the U.S. is just not, we don't do government well. And I tell the people here too is don't expect it to.
Yeah.
Right. So when people think that, oh, we need to have this or that, these countries do this and that, that's I don't know. You're trying to you're trying to make a short person good at basketball. It's not in its identity, and so you kind of have to appreciate. So whenever the government, so I'm not surprised, is basically what I'm saying, that it tried to do some broad, overreaching, initiative, and that it ended up
failing.
We're a bottom up country.
Yeah.
And I think the U.S. would be much better, and the citizens of it would maybe be a lot more relaxed if they just recognize that that's its strength, and we should probably work with that strength, and they recognize that that's the way the U.S. is going to proceed.
Yeah, I think we have a very innovative culture, but I think you're right. The way that our system kind of doesn't work very well in a lot of ways. Healthcare. I like to say our health system has, you could look at a fully free market system where there's competition to drive down prices, and then there's the profit motive, so people make stuff, and then you have the more socialist one where you have, it's more organized, and there's a single payer that can kind of negotiate for better prices and give everybody more fair treatment. And in the U.S., we kind of take the worst aspects of both and put them together. So you have a profit motive, but there's so much regulation. There's not really free competition. So you have a profit motive that drives up the prices, and you don't have competition to drive them back down. And you kind of get the worst of both worlds almost.
Yeah, I actually, if you talk about a variety of issues like drugs or immigration even, these are all very messy and difficult issues, but the one I think I like least to address is healthcare, because we're between such a rock and a hard place that I don't see a good way even forward, that you just have to kind of recognize that it's going to be a disaster, not a disaster, but it's going to be messy, or just kind of ugly at times, and that's just the way it's going to be, and day by day we'll just chip away at this without any real
and
beautiful horizon in sight.
I'm a fan of a bottom-up approach where it's possible. I think I would love to see where tests can be developed locally and done almost at home and this kind of stuff, and cut out a lot of the middleman.
Actually, if there's a silver lining, it's with technology. And technology making things cheaper and more individualized and localized, so that you might not, but that's a whole other, that might go against the people who want to see a bit, a more general approach to healthcare. Or maybe it can work hand in hand with that, where you can get some kind of national model while also having these localized. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a messy situation. I'm a techno-optimist, though. I like to describe myself that way. I'm optimistic about the future because of technology.